Welcome to the AxeCast podcast. Conversations with interesting people from the world of Acadia athletics and more, talking about their lives, successes, and failures. And now let's join hosts Len Hawley and Eric Cederberg for the next 15 to 20 minutes as they dive into the life of today's guest.
So our very first podcast, very pleased to be joined by a gentleman that coached men's basketball at Acadia and has moved on to bigger and I think better things when it comes to basketball, involved with the National Women's Basketball Program. Steve Baur is joining Eric and I. Steve, great to have you on here. Thanks.
I'm so excited to be back. I think any chance to get back on with you guys, the Acadia crew, but then to hear that on the first makes us a little extra exciting. So thanks.
Well, you know what? You're a first in different ways, and I want to get to that here in just a little bit. And when I say that, you coached without having played men's basketball at the university level, but take us back a little bit before you arrive at Acadia, because you're a student at Acadia in the late 90s, graduating in 2001. How do you arrive at Acadia University?
Wow, that's a fun trip down memory lane. I think coming out of high school, one of the real attractive things to Acadia was that not only did it have the great academic reputation, but it was close enough to home that I could be home, but far enough away I had a little independence. And I think those really were like driving factors at the time. And then it's one of those pieces you reflect, you look back and you think, it's funny that would lead to such an important decision. You end up loving Acadia and the time there, and this like distance was such a factor for me, which would have been such a low factor, a more mature decision. But it did get me there on campus as a student.
You did grow up in Sackville, Nova Scotia. So, what was basketball to you growing up?
I still love basketball. I think one of my instant bonds as a younger person was that my father really liked basketball, and that really brought us together. So he's always been a big fan. So I enjoyed the game. I played it casually. I never played at a high level. As you mentioned, I didn't have like university success, but was an average high school player in Sackville, Nova Scotia, which would be my pathway as a player. But enjoyment was always really high and always a big fan. So it was a student of the game from early on.
So where did you play in high school then?
Millwood. I was a Millwood guy, and Sackville High were obviously the arch rivals. Only two schools in the town.
So let's go back to the whole point that, so you play high school basketball, you come to Acadia, you're a student here. What'd you take at Acadia?
I took business, but I was one of the first few at the time. I don't want to misspeak of how this has landed, but at the time they were offering some e-commerce type degree. They're piloting that, and I was part of the group that was considered for that, but I chose to stay within business and take a major in computer science. And my decision ultimately fell because I didn't know where that degree was going to land as an e-commerce one in 10 years. But another one of those decisions where you look back, probably would have been really good to get a first one out with an e-commerce degree. But I finished with business, with computer science. I also specialized in the accounting stream, so I had all of my prerequisites done to go into as a CA as my next step coming out of school.
You didn't jump right into coaching basketball at Acadia. You actually leave Acadia, and so talk about how the whole coaching thing at the university level is unveiled.
Yeah, it was a fun path because it was not my intention leaving. I had seen somewhere at one point, I think as I was graduating, there's a stat that 70% of us do something different than our undergraduate degree. So I was really quite curious where I was going to land as well, but felt focused that I wanted to get into accounting and had those prerequisites done and had started doing some work with a movie producer on the side where I was doing the books, which has helped me gain the last little experience I needed to get in. And during that opportunity, one of my friends needed some help with a minor basketball team. He had got a new job that conflicted with the practice slot. So almost out of like a favor to a friend was my first coaching or my first step into it. So I filled in with this minor group. And then within a year, I think this is probably part of my personality, I realized that all these Sackville minor basketball players were playing out of Bedford, so we didn't have our own minor system. So I helped start Sackville Minor. And one of the errors I made in that process, which ended up being really key to my coaching career, was because I was the only one in the organization, I didn't think about getting the coaches lined up. So I did 6 or 7 teams that next year trying to get everything running smoothly. So that was my full feet into coaching and learning all the differences of the different age groups and needs and requirements between some male and female challenges as well.
So at some point it clicks in your head that you want to take a move from minor basketball to university. And if I'm correct, you headed out to Brandon, Manitoba.
Yeah, the pathway continued. So I start that minor piece, and within a year or two, again, you have all these athletes participating, which was really fun. I enjoyed that stage. Then I had a couple that were invited to provincial team tryouts. So as that happened, being quite interested, I followed the athletes along to that process, and then being right guy in the right spot, which has probably been the story of my career. They needed another hand one time on deck, which was Les Barry with the provincial team. Les gave me an opportunity with that group. My athlete didn't make that team, but I made that team. And then it turned into a Canada Games team. So Les and I ended up spending a couple summers together. I was probably his third assistant. Les then got the job at Brandon University, as you mentioned, on the women's side. And I kind of took that chance. I was really enjoying the basketball side, and I thought, wow, what a jump to college. And at my age, if I can be at college, maybe I can really pave a path of where I want to go with this long term. So Les gave me that opportunity. I went to Brandon with him, and we did the women's program. And it was quite a learning experience as well. That program, I think, had lost, I think it was 100 games in a row at that stage. So we came in and went 10-20, and we were on the door for the playoffs, which is a really big feat. It was pretty exciting. And then the next year, their men's program, which was in the opposite state, was now making a coaching change. So Les got that opportunity. So then I took that. I met the move with him. I had a chance to kind of live both of those in Brandon. 1 year with the women's program that we got kickstarted, and 1 year on the men's program, which was a national contender. So the full gamut of experience.
You've gone from accounting to coaching. very, very close ties there, very.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to count all the baskets, and
Right.
I started on Les's staff, which also is funny where it's taken me with the national program and opportunities given there. Is I actually did stats for Les to begin, and you fast forward, you take the degree and experience that I had education wise. Now this where I started a bit in basketball, and that also helped me get the opportunity with the national program, which was to be able to do some of the numbers and analysis on top of coaching.
So all of that now on your resume, you land at Acadia in 2008, and you take over the Axemen basketball program. And I don't think it's any secret that, it went through several tumultuous years, with different coaches, and maybe didn't have a clear direction. You land in 2008. What's the right word to say about this? Do you see it as a bit of a mess, and you got a lot of work here to clean things up?
At the time, the director that gave me the opportunity was Brian Heaney, and I remember one of our first meetings. When he was quite close to you, he had said to me, "I don't know how ready you really are right now, but I will tell you, you're one step ahead of the athletes. So as long as you can keep getting better, and we can move this program in the right direction, you just have to stay ahead of the athletes." And the reality of the scenarios, as you touched on, is it was a bit of we were having some success, but there were also some changes going on campus and with the program. So Brian said, number one priority is get this thing back to the Acadia standards and values, and then within a short window, you also have to be winning. And I thought that fits me perfectly. I'm an Acadia guy. I live those values. So and we all want to win. So let's go do this.
What were one of the priorities in terms and where I'm going with this, I talk to coaches, sometimes what they need to do when they're coming into taking over a program, especially if it's a program that maybe has had a few bumps along the way in the years just before they arrive, is it more about trying to establish a new culture? What were some of the main things you needed to do to turn the program around in your mind?
Yeah, in cultures, it's a really, as you know, so many layers go into what makes a great culture. And I think that is ultimately the answer that everybody's always trying to do. And for me, and what I thought the key was, I think I had a lot of support from Brian, and Ray Ivany was the president at that time as well, who was really into this, is we really had to get the right people into the program. And I think it was around the time the book came out, From Good to Great, and they had an expression, I think, in that book was like, get the right people on the bus. Now, I could be my paraphrase may not be too accurate, but I do believe that was the right gist of what was going on with both that book and that phrase. And I think that really caught traction with us. And what we thought the most important first step was we have to evaluate A, who's here, and then B, who do we really need here? More importantly than even winning or taking the next step was this culture's got to get cleaned up so we're all sharing the same values and we're living what Acadia truly means to all of us. And then the rest will fall in place. So that was kind of the top priority for year one. And one of the pieces for me that I found really interesting, it was a really great growth moment because you go in there as a young coach, and I think probably quite naive, thinking, this is going to be great. I'm going to be honest with all these guys, and everyone's just going to jump on board and be really excited to play with me, and it's going to be just so seamless. And of course, everyone's got their own story of what's going on, and when you're going through a roster shakeup or a change of coaches, there's a lot of challenges that come with that. So, it was a good growing experience for me to realize what everyone else was carrying, but at the same point that we had to get it to, we want the right people on campus living what we want men's basketball to represent for Acadia.
Would you necessarily, as a recruiting coach, sacrifice maybe a high-end athlete? There might be this kid out there in high school that's putting up all kinds of points to bring in the character kid. Do you know where I'm going with this?
Yeah, and I think the answer to that is yes. And I think it goes back to your entire talent ID and filtering process. I think getting the right people is important. And with that, I think that can really vary by schools, meaning you can have two schools with great culture, whatever they define it, but there's also like a fit for the school, the campus, the life on campus, the teammates, and the coach. And you have to find the people that match kind of all those pieces and want to be there with you. And one of the best lines I thought I had heard, and we try to use in the recruiting process is, of course, in the good times, we're all going to be great, but you have to have confidence and comfort with the way that we're going to handle the poor times together. And usually a good example for a teenager who's leaving high school for that is talking about, when discipline's going on, hopefully you go perfectly through your career, but when discipline's happening, this is the way we're going to handle it. And are you going to be comfortable with that? And I think it's a great question, because if the answer is no, I don't like the way you handle those things, you're probably not going to be ultimately happy in this environment. And for us, that was one of the things we try to get to very early in the conversation. So we are looking at talent. I mean, talent's obviously an important stakeholder in getting our team where it wants to go. But as you mentioned, Len, we had to find people that also fit those values to get us where we really wanted to be.
Well, it took you 4 seasons to go from 6-14 to 14-6. And if I recall, that was even a championship season too in 2011 and 12. You recall some of the things you went through to get to that point? What a lot of things that I do remember. The work you put into getting Owen Clausen, which I think was probably pretty important for the team, and your development of the team. We had We Want Owen, which seemed to work. I don't know if I've ever seen anything like that at any other universities after that. So. Your thoughts on the process from that team when you first took over to a championship to even, 2 seasons that followed and you were 15-5 too.
Yeah, the first few years were the recruiting obviously took the forefront of what we were trying to do. And I think we made quite an effort. The Owen one caught a lot of attention, which was great. And it makes sense. He was a really critical piece for us. Some, coming in, which was Owen. We knew he was going to be a big recruit. And sometimes players turn out a little bit later, so you need a little bit of luck to identify the right people. But we had prioritized getting the people on campus. And then I think to your question, what happened is some challenges in that is in the early years, there's some growing pains when you have so many young people in there trying to be these stars and leaders. And both of those things are really tough as a young person. And I think as a teenager, and even as ourselves, we all want that. You want the opportunity to be the go-to and really push the program in the right direction. But there's always some value, and I think the people that have been there before to show you the way. And we had lost that. We didn't really have anybody that was now sitting in the background that had been through the times with us at Acadia and could show them. So in our first class coming in, which was actually the class before my recruiting, which was Justin Boulier and Casey Fox were both a part of that. And then having Owen and Anthony Sears join it within the next year, you had all these people in the first or second year that you were trying to lead each other through. This is what happens during the good. This is what happens during the bad. When I'm having down days, this is what it looks like. And there's a learning and growth that goes with that. So we felt early on, and probably about like our second and third years, that we were still not hitting the mark of being like an 18-2 team like we wanted. We were closer to 500, but we knew our talent was a little ahead of that, and it was actually just the maturation and growth of us as people and handling the challenges that was our important step. And then take us to the fast forward in the early years, we ended up having a few success moments in the playoffs that really catapulted that. And I remember Boudelier hit a couple of huge shots for us against Cape Breton was a bit of a surprise win, but going through those times is what you really needed to learn how to win and what was required of each other.
Yeah, you know what? Eric mentioned the 14-6 season in 2011 and 12. And going back to sort of that conversation around characters and building, I'm a big believer, and everybody wants to win. Coaches want to win, players, fans, but I really believe there's so much value in losses and that whole growth period. You want to win those games, but I think you learn so much when you grow as a group. And like you said, you're a sub 500 team for 3 years before you sort of hit your mark. How important is that? You go in and you want to win, but when you look back on how important is it in terms of the growth?
Yeah, Len, if only we could all, I think we all are aware of this. It's like human nature. If we could only look at our wins the same way we look at our losses, it would be the ideal scenario. But the truth is, as you said, you need to go into the tougher scenarios, the losses, the gut check moments to really ask the tougher questions sometimes. And again, with the younger group, that really helped because sometimes it took one or two things going poorly to really recognize what the challenge was. And what I mean by that is, we had some guys as a staff, we were young, as athletes we were young, and sometimes we thought we were doing all the right things, but maybe we were confusing working hard with like working smart, meaning were we covering all the bases we really needed to improve? And the losses sometimes highlight that because you get into scenarios where we talk about not being prepared for something going into a game, or athletes not being comfortable to deliver in certain situations, or not knowing what to look at from the other one when they were in their most challenging spots. And I remember like some real ones of that would be, I've missed 3 or 4 shots in a row, and now they're feeling the pressure of like, are they picking at each other? Are there comments coming in? Is there a support going in? And even the very genuine questions with each other of like, well, do we give you the ball again for the next time, or are you supposed to then give it to somebody else? And when you're winning, that question is hard to truly answer as much as we want it to be. It's kind of like, it kind of works out. It almost ends up being an underlying piece to that equation. But when you lose, people actually want to know, like, no, we've lost 2 in a row right now. Like, are you getting down on yourself when you've missed those 3? Should you give the ball to me? Am I ready to bail us out in that scenario? And we had some really good conversations, I think, with the athletes and staff to realize what people needed when things weren't going great. And again, what those answers look like when they're in their 4th and 5th years versus what they were like in their 1st and 2nd years were quite different. And that was part where we all had to grow together and realize in the most challenging times, there's an element that we need of each other that I don't know that we were prepared going in and had to lose to figure out.
Sure makes you appreciate it. When you roll into 2011 and 12 and you have such a great season, 14-6, and then you hang a banner, you win the championship. And all your efforts for 3 years and all the efforts of the athletes, the reward must be just amazing.
It was like an incredible feat that I still remember now. But the thing I carry with me the most for Acadia was the year that we won and the women went at the same time, and bringing back both of those to the gym and just seeing like the unity. And again, as you said, everybody wants to win, but to almost like celebrate what had happened together made it that much more special. And to hang a banner for your own program is always incredible. When you do it with like both in the school, it just really felt like a really cool moment for Acadia. But the chance to go in there and like have somebody else as a peer realizing the same things, the sacrifice and work that had gone in to get there, and all share that moment was really a special time.
Well, we fast forward to 2015, the summer of where Steve Baur decides to leave Acadia. And a lot of people didn't really know the story. People kind of questioned why. He's only been here 6 years. Yeah. So tell me what's going through your mind then, because I have an idea, and maybe people don't. You made a move from head coach of Acadia Axemen, had from 6-14 to 15-5, and then you're off to national women's program.
Yeah, that was a a surprising summer, and I don't really know where to start in this equation of how things roll out. Meaning, I was and still would be so happy at Acadia. As my alma mater, we were having success. I love it there. I love the people there. My family's in the area. It truly felt like a place where I could have stayed and been very content for an entire career. I think the opportunity to go to an Olympics and work with our country's very best athletes was really enticing and something I wanted to look at a bit. And the reason I bring that up is even when I started the process, I was really unsure. And I think, looking back now having had the chance to live it, having gone to an Olympics, having worked with these athletes, I do think it's the move that I'm happy that I made, despite my missing Acadia and the torn both directions. But I think this was the level that I did want to try and jump and measure myself as we're all competitors. But in that summer, just knowing all the connections I had to the area, it was really challenging. And it was one of those ones where, as you mentioned, Eric, I think a few people also didn't grasp the head coach to assistant coach piece. But for me personally, I didn't value those pieces as that critical, meaning I just truly love being part of these teams and contributing. And I think feeling valued is always what we all want. If we can get into a team where you feel like you're valued and contributing to success, it's a pretty great feeling. And I was confident to make that jump with the national program that I could get that same sense. So whether my title was head coach or assistant coach wasn't a deciding factor for myself, but I do know for a lot of people asking, it was a surprising move.
Sure.
Big difference from going from a university program to a national program, and then you've coached men for the last 6 years, and now you're on the women's side. Were there big adjustments for you?
Yeah, for sure. There was a lot of adjustments. And you know what I think one of the biggest ones was for me, and it was great for my own personal growth. Like I look back, I would coach so much differently even at Acadia now, but I'm sure we would all say that with experience. But at the time, it was almost like the power structure changed, meaning as a head coach at a college program, you're an authoritarian almost type figure, meaning you can just like pick your path and tell people this is what you're doing. And, I was probably guilty of doing a little too much of that myself, but you get into this context where you get these pros, and we had athletes that were, I want to say, the same age as myself starting off. And that's not how our relationship was going to fly, at least from the beginning. So it was a great chance for me to reflect on what leadership really was and how I can help them develop as athletes. So it was a big change. And I think there are some differences in general between coaching men and women. And again, those are broad strokes because every individual can be different, but I think there are some different challenges that come within it. And it's a common question. So but I'm just going to assume you want to know. I'm just going to answer that part as well. But usually on the men's side, it's very common to value performance first, and that kind of leads to acceptance. And on the female side, it's very common to search for acceptance first and then performance. So the value of getting people together on the same page can be really important on the women's side, whereas on the men's side, sometimes you can get away with, as long as you're talented, we'll give you a little more leeway. Again, even in our own environment, we live it that you don't have 100% of the people that fit either of those profiles on a team, but that would be a general statement of some differences that were thrown at me as my worlds were changing.
I know Eric's going to fire off a whole bunch of questions at you here in a moment, but I sort of started this whole interview off by saying that you're in a small group of people that didn't play that high level of sport, and you've coached it. And I can think of a few people, even in the university world, that Gardner McDougall at UMB never played any high level of hockey, but he's coached a very successful hockey program, and you're in that sort of that same bubble in that So for you on a personal level, looking back at how you've been able to grow as a coach in basketball must be quite rewarding.
It is. I mean, you got to enjoy the things you put your heart and your mind to, which is, kind of jump in both feet here to the game of basketball early on, as we touched on. And I think when you put yourself into something, to then have success or be working out is always very rewarding and a very gratifying feeling. But I think for me, the key in that, and I'm sure every coach would be a little different, but at the key, all the athletes truly want to get better, and everyone's trying to win. And I think if you can help them on that pathway, you're doing your job. So whether you play or not doesn't matter as much as you helping them achieve their goals. And I think that ends up tying back to, it's been really part of the enjoyment, because I think I've been fortunate to be part of some very good teams at Acadia and now with Team Canada. So a lot of people are leaving these experiences I happen to be a part of where we're having success and they're enjoying the relationship. So it's been great for me.
And now it's time for Eric's Cut to the Chase 5 questions.
I'm going to give you 5 hard-hitting questions here. Questions that you may not be prepared for. You know what? Now I'm going to have some questions here that maybe we draw a little bit of your character and find out things that are important to you. So you're a father of 2 girls now.
Yes.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And if you had a 3rd girl and you had a choice of a name, your wife has nothing to do with it, what name would that be?
Wow. Well, we've gone, as you know, I don't know if it's supposed to be like rapid fire here. We went with Aloe for our firstborn. We thought it was like phonetically something that would balance my wife's family in China, and they could hopefully have some stronger pronunciation, which was a miss. We didn't hit that at all. We liked the name, but it didn't help phonetically. And then we went with Peony for the second one because it was the Chinese national flower, and it blossoms in May when our daughter was born, so it seemed to fit. So anyway, my long answer, like if we have a 3rd one, it does seem to be like flowers and plants would be a bit of a theme for us, and I'd probably base it on somewhere around when our baby is due.
Okay, I thought maybe it'd be something like LeBron or, tied into basketball, but I guess not. What would be 3 words you would hope that people would use to describe you?
Honest, hardworking, dependable.
You're all 3 of those. Good.
Thank you.
What's your favorite quote of all time? Do you have a quote out there that really...
I don't know if it's like a famous quote, but I do know one that I think of often. And
right.
it was Brian Heaney when I first started. And it was in the same meeting when he told me you've got to be better than the athletes. But he also told me, I'm your boss. Don't let me beat you in here, and don't let me leave before you. Don't let me leave after you. And I was always like, okay, I know what at the time I thought, is this guy just telling me to work more? But as I've lived longer, I actually get what he was, I think, really pushing me, which was, you're young, earn some of your stripes a little bit and put in some work. So I actually think of it often in moments when I'm usually frustrated and ready to call it a day. I think of Brian and be like, have I actually covered my bases yet, or do I need to put a little more work?
Okay, second last question I got for you here. If you could be a head coach of one team, what team would it be? Maybe it's not basketball. Maybe it's a different sport.
It would be, I think, my goals or dreams right now is I'd love to have the opportunity to coach our Olympic team. So the team I'm on right now would be my next.
Nice. Okay, last question we got here for you. What would you consider your biggest failure?
Oh, we at Acadia, and I was still an assistant with Les the year I served as an interim for part of the year. We had beaten Carleton, which was so exciting. I felt like it was just a real statement for our program and returning Acadia to the national map. And we had Brock in the final, who was a great team, but I truly felt like we were the better team, and we were battling some emotional and mental fatigue going the final. And in that game, there were a few decisions down the stretch that I felt I was quite influential in making for us that ended up being just terrible decisions. And I have tried to apologize to Les, and it's one of those items to know, if we ever got back together for a reunion, I feel like I owe the team an apology, as it's just wears on me as a painful moment. We made a couple subs that I didn't like, now living back, and a couple decisions on offense that just really, I felt like I helped stall us out. So I feel like it cost us a national championship.
Well, I'm glad to say you're our first person to be interviewed, and appreciate you being with us today. Lenny, you want to wrap it up with anything?
Well, I was going to say, I don't think we're letting him walk out that door beaten and bruised here. So it's been great to do this and sort of get some reflection. And, can't think of somebody that, is, that honest, dependable, and hardworking. Those are 3 words we think of when we think of Steve Baur. And I wish you all the best here as you go ahead with your Olympic dreams and what have you.
Yeah, thanks, guys. It was great to hear from you. It was great to see you both, too. It's been the one plus of Zoom here in this era, is to get a chance to see some faces again, and it's been too long, so it's nice to see you both.